Welcome to, I guess, the first edition of our podcast revamped. We've done a few podcasts in the past. I think we've had quote unquote like 1.5 seasons, but we decided kind of in the wake of the stuff that's happened in our country recently, but just Chris and I, Chris is our intern and audio engineer. We've been thinking about how to kind of refocus our podcast to do something a little different. And as you'll see in the podcast that's coming up, my friend Grace Kim James, who reached out to me, she was kind of the inspiration behind it. But what we realized in her reaching out to us and in the wake of some of the stuff that's happened in our nation, that we thought that this podcast would very specifically focus in on people and their stories, to explore different people's stories and see how they can inspire us, to challenge us, to guide us, to be a dream for us, to see how we might better be the people that God calls us to be. Each of the people that you're going to meet on these podcasts going forward are going to have two things primarily in common. One, they love Jesus and they follow him. They are disciples of Christ. And then two, they are quite good at living their life as Christians in whatever context that they live in. You were going to be hopefully speaking to Grace, is a executive, a senior VP at Atlantic Records, which is one of the, if not the leading record label in the nation. We're going to have Pastor Kobe Cagle, who is here locally at Ecclesia Clear Lake, who I've known for a few years, and just kind of get his perspective. We're going to hopefully have some other folks, people who do lots of different things, but just to be able to share what they're doing, and then they can inspire us to see what God might help us to do and God might be calling us into. I think we're aware of this idea that for a long time, Asian Americans have stayed kind of silent or hidden in a lot of different ways. And I think God is calling us to speak. God is calling us to be vocal about our faith, be vocal about God and his ways, be vocal about justice, be vocal about the life that he wants all of us to live, the peace and the goodness and the righteousness that he desires in all of us. And we wanted to be able to share different people's stories that aren't always just from the church, definitely not from our church, to be able to help us to live our stories better, to inspire us that we don't have to just do it one way, that there are multiple different ways, and that that we can engage and broaden our horizons and open our eyes and then help us to use our voice as they use theirs and we hear their stories. So we're super excited about kind of where the podcast is going. Like I said, this first episode that you're about to hear is with my dear friend Grace Kim James, who lives in New York, who goes way back with me. I've known her since junior high. And so we're super excited about that. And then I think the beauty of this is that we're going to hope that our guests aren't going to be just one-time guests. We're going to have multiple stories, multiple times where we can engage with them. And Grace, like I said, with her, we've already lined up a few different podcasts. And the first one is just kind of getting to know her a little bit better. So we thank you for joining us. We thank you for tuning in. I didn't introduce myself. If you don't know, my name is Pastor Pete. I'm one of the pastors here at ARCHE, along with Pastor Goose. And then we have our three interns, Chris, Richard, and Sungtek. Chris is our main audio engineer. He's helping us make this sound great and get us all the technical stuff. So we're super excited that you're here. And so we hope that this is going to be challenging for you. It's going to be encouraging for you, and it's going to help you to think and dream. And as you'll hear in the podcast throughout, to really step out of the boat and into the water as God calls us to help us to be the people that God wants us to be. So after a little intro music that Chris hopefully will make, and hopefully it'll be dope, then you'll get right to the podcast. So thank you for joining us again. And now to our intro. Herman. All right. Man, it is my privilege and my honor and just so good to have my friend Grace on this podcast, kind of the restarting of a brand new podcast. So we've done some podcasts in the past, but we're kind of revamping it as we described kind of in the intro. But so good to have my friend Grace. Before we obviously have her speak and things like that, let me just introduce all of y'all to who she is, though she is a friend of mine. Grace and I have known each other since middle school, literally 12, 13 years old in those very, very awkward days. We're so old that we actually don't have Facebook photos because Facebook came out when we were in college. So she went to NYU, I went to UVA in Virginia, her in New York, obviously. So we don't even have Facebook photos that I could draw up, but I was hoping to get some old ones. I have some from my graduation, but I didn't have any of you in them. You were too busy being valedictorian, all that kind of
I
stuff.
was not valedictorian.
You were up there. That's all I remember. And then so kind of as we introduced in the intro, we're just excited to have Grace because I think this is going to be a new way for us to explore different people's stories and just what God is doing in them, kind of how we bridge faith and life and work and all these things and how God has called us into the world. But let me introduce you first, Grace, just kind of briefly. Grace hails from New York. She is married to her husband, Mike, who is an author, and he's worked for ESPN and Stephen A. Smith's show in the back. I'm just noting some stuff that I remember off the top of my head. But also now she is currently a senior vice president of marketing at Atlantic Records. She works with artists like Lizzo, obviously Hamilton, Lin-Manuel Miranda, Missy Elliott, Pink Sweats, and others, a host of others that she's worked with. And so we're super excited to have her. She's obviously... There aren't too many Korean American people in positions that you're in, but also obviously Korean American females as well. So, and the fact that we go so far back, but just really excited to have you. So, thank you for coming onto this podcast and agreeing to speak with us and just kind of sharing your story.
Thank you for having me. And Pete, I think now that you say that we've known each other since we were 12, 13, that we've known each other longer than half of our lives. And that's a pretty insane thing to think about, actually, a very sobering thought. But thank you for having me. I'm so just, I don't know, honored. I feel like I'm getting an award to be able to speak with you.
We're not at that level yet, but I mean, I just don't remember the very first time, if I'm not mistaken, the very first time I met you was in the orchestra room at Lanier Middle School when we were doing, I think, orientation. We were all in there. I had moved to, I hadn't been a part of the elementary schools that fed into Lanier, but I moved and then I obviously got in there. And then that's, I think, the first time I remember meeting you. We're orchestra dorks to the core. So it's fitting in that kind of way, but.
I'm not going to lie. I don't think I remember the first time meeting you, but I think my first memory of you is actually in our history class for some reason. I think the reason I remember that so clearly is because I think my first day of middle school, or even the first week, I remember seeing this Korean American kid that was in most of my classes, and thinking, why is that guy in most of my classes? Why am I seeing him? I probably should get to know him and be friends with him because clearly we're in all these classes together. And clearly orchestra definitely bonds people. Any sort of extracurricular activity definitely bonds people, for sure. But yes, I played violin and Pete played the viola, although he definitely mixed it up and switched it up on us in high school and played bass. And how I even remember this right now, I'm so proud of myself.
Those are the glory days in some ways. I have so many fond memories of back then. We were pretty. We were in all like similar classes all the way from 7th grade all the way to senior year. We were always in orchestra together every single year. We were in a lot of different things together. And then I think near end of junior year, senior year particularly, we became really close friends. We were hanging out all the time, and we kind of had a little trio of people, and that we were like always doing things with. And I still remember the day that you decided to go to NYU. I was shocked, not because you could get into NYU, obviously I knew that, but the fact that you would go to NYU. Obviously we'll discuss this a little bit later as we talk about how you got to where you got to, but I don't think any of us would have ever expected that that's the route you would have taken. And then to see where your life has gone and what you've done since then, again, is a bit of a shocker in such a good way. One of the things that we're going to talk about, Grace, with you is that you are in so many ways so Korean American, but so not Korean American. And that's kind of the beauty of where we're at. And so, let's go over just a quick, we've been doing it a little bit, but share with me kind of maybe one of your more fondest memories of our friendship, so that we can kind of give people a context of how well we do know each other. Obviously, I think we're talking as if we do, but I think maybe a story or two from your end, and then one from my end would give people a little bit of context as to who we are, and that we do indeed go back as far as we say we do.
I think my fondest memory is really the 6 years that we spent in orchestra. And while some of us are probably laughing that we were the stereotypical Asian kids who played a stringed instrument, it was also some of the best times of our lives. Like, not only getting to be creative, right, and learn how to play an instrument and actually play it well, but also to go on these class trips. Disney World is definitely a fond memory. I honestly don't remember where else we went. Like, drawing a blank at this point, but we had Miss Crumb.
Did we go to Atlanta one time?
Oh, we did go to Atlanta, and we went to the Coca-Cola factory. Yeah, but Miss Crumb was our orchestra teacher and conductor all through middle school and high school. So really, we had a really unique experience, if you think about it, that we had one core group of orchestra friends and also the same teacher for such a long period of time. And she was the one constant, I think, for the majority of our youth. And now that I put it in that context, I'm like, wow, like, she really had to put up with us for a really long time. But we also grew really close to her too. And there's a special connection between students and teachers. And then the other fond memory I have is just like senior year. And Pete and I were both, I don't want to say smart, but we were definitely academically like, what's the word? Like, really just out there, and we
tried.
Actually, I'm not going to say we tried. I think we did the lowest amount of work and somehow we did okay. No, I'm just kidding. We helped each other with homework, but I think then, AP Spanish was probably one of my favorite classes our senior year. And that was a very, very special class for all of us. And I think when you talk about the fact that I got into NYU and decided to go to NYU, we had one specific teacher, Senora Kyle, who very much cheered for us anytime any of us got into college. And she created these banners. And so, yeah, those are probably my two fondest memories.
Yeah, for me, yeah, definitely all the orchestra stuff. Because again, like you said, name dropping Miss Crumb, who was there to put up with, like, she loved you because you did all the things well, and I was a pain in her side for most of those years. But she put up with me and definitely loved on me, and we changed a lot in those ways. Even playing string bass senior year, all that kind of stuff. So there's definitely those memories. Another fond memory is that I would always go over to your house, and your mom was always so loving to me. I would always get so much food. Hanging out at your house. So that's another big memory. And then, yeah, just kind of senior year, just thinking about you going to New York. And then I remember being like, man, like, she's going to New York and she's going to be a New Yorker. And then I remember I was saying, I think I had said to somebody, I don't remember, maybe it must have been, I can't remember who, but I was like, either Grace is going to go to New York and just going to bomb because she just is not going to be able to hack it as a city girl, or she's just going to fall in love with it and we're never going to see her again, in the sense that she's never coming back. I just, for some reason, I had a feeling that it was going to be one of those two things. And of course you went and you literally never came back. New York is home. You've lived in New York longer than you haven't lived in New York, basically, right? Almost. Or is it like exactly down the middle?
Exactly down the middle. Although I guess if we're doing it by numbers, I've lived in New York longer than any other city. But yeah, I think, it's funny because even at this age, I love to watch some of these like young adult movies, right? And you always see that one kid who breaks off from the group of friends and they move. And I'm like, I was that kid. I don't know how I became that kid, because I definitely was not really the most outgoing or independent person per se. But I think for whatever reason, when it came time to pick a school and decide what I was doing, after high school, I don't know where the courage came from. I really, really don't. I just was like, I'm going, guys. And it wasn't that I didn't care about my friends. I love my friends. And I think the hardest thing was to say to friends like you, right, that like, hey, I'm not going to stay in state. I'm actually going to go. And as scary as it was also one of the best decisions ever.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
So it's a perfect segue into, just giving us a description or just kind of describing the journey from that point. Again, I want to give some context because this is one of the beauties, and this is kind of what makes this story, I think, so great, is that Grace in high school, literally in so many different ways, couldn't be more Korean American, your stereotypical Korean American female. Her name is Grace. Her last name is Kim. She plays in the orchestra. She sang in the choir. She was a good student. She got good grades, never did anything terrible, all that kind of stuff. Took all the AP classes you could take, all that. Literally, it's like to the T from A to Z. She described kind of what you would want in an Asian American, Korean American student and female, and particularly growing up in Northern Virginia, where it is the third largest, at least at that time, it was the third largest Korean American population in all of America. So literally, in any way, shape, and form you could think of, Grace was the prototypical. She wanted to be a lawyer. Both of us wanted to be lawyers, and so we were kind of going right in that path, literally as stereotypically as you can get. And then obviously NYU came in, and you went in with the dreams of being a lawyer, but obviously God and just your story kind of took on a different path. So could you tell us kind of how you got to where you got to from that point on?
I think it's very similar to your story, in that, like you said, we both were extremely ambitious academically, right, and professionally, and you and I both had the intention of becoming lawyers. I think you wanted to go into sports, law, and represent athletes, which was perfect for you because you were an all-star athlete and played basketball in addition to being this academic guy. And I was like, I want to do entertainment law. And I didn't quite understand what that meant, right? I think I grew up watching MTV and BET and VH1, like all the rest of us, at a time when those three networks were at their prime, and we would watch.
Used to be on TV.
Yeah, when they actually used to be on TV, when we actually used to watch music videos and concerts and things like that. And I remember looking and saying, like, I want to do that. And I didn't know what that meant, but I remember watching a lot of music videos and shows and being like, I want to do whatever those people do. So in my mind, for whatever reason, I connected entertainment to New York and music to New York because that's where a lot of this stuff was based. And so for me, the ultimate goal was to get to New York City, period. And NYU was just that vehicle for me to get there. I got to NYU, or I got in. I remember my folks having a conversation with me that it was a really expensive school, and somehow it just did not register that was the talk that they had with me of like, maybe you should reconsider. And I was so dead set on going. And I remember, our last few like hangouts together and just not thinking that anything was really going to change except for the fact that like, I'm going to go do my thing. And I came to NYU in probably 2002, right? Went to NYU, didn't really know what I was going to study per se. I was like, oh, I'm going to do pre-law. Pre-law is not a major. Just went through probably a year or two of trying to figure out what I was actually going to study, like many of us, and feeling a bit pressured as to deciding what my ultimate like path was going to be. And so I ultimately ended up on communications and journalism, which was not something that I really, really intended. And to be quite honest, I don't know if I should or, should have or would go back and do it again, where I would gamble a very, very expensive education and not knowing what I did. But it worked out because how I ended up was I knew I just wanted to work in the music business, period. And it was totally a God thing where one day I was eating in my school's dining hall and saw that there was a panel that featured a lot of people in the music business. Some names I'd heard of, some I hadn't. So I remember literally one night like dumping my food tray and running to the student center at that time where this panel had already started. And I remember sitting there and like watching some of these executives talk about the business. And again, still being very shy and introverted, I remember getting the courage to go up and say hi to a particular person. That person is, his name is Russ Jones. And at that time he was at J Records. It was a newly formed label that Clive Davis had created. And Clive was someone who was very well respected in the music business. And he gave me his card. And I remember that night staying up till 3 a.m. creating a resume. I was like, I would love to intern for you. I don't know what this means, but I would love to intern for you. And so he gave me his card. I had no resume, but made one up and stayed up until 3 a.m. and sent it via our poor internet in our dorms, right? And I luckily got an interview. And so that's how it all started, was this. There are certain moments in my life where I had moments of, am I going to be brave enough? Am I going to be brave enough to do something that is so opposite of what I normally am? And so those two things were, one, moving to New York, two, having the courage to go up and talk to somebody that may or may not really, think that I was cool or deserving of an opportunity, but I did it. And then from there, it was very much I worked really hard, but also was very blessed to be in the right situations at the right time to move up. So I think there's a combination definitely of working hard, being smart, and being a good person, but also putting yourself in the right position so that God can come in and bless you. And so throughout the last 15 years or whatever it has been, I've been able to join different companies in very different capacities, but I went from being an intern to a temp to an assistant, and literally climbed that ladder. And, at soon to be 36, now currently senior vice president at Atlantic Records, which is, one of the top labels in our country, if not the number one label. And I'm so proud to be here because it's not something that I would have ever anticipated or dreamed of.
Yeah. I mean, to see, because again, I know that we probably think we're old or whatever, old, but we're not very old at all. I'm 36. You're about to be 36 pretty soon. And so for you to be at your position, knowing that you started out as an intern and you literally climb the scales, like one step at a time, and you've gotten to where you've gotten to give the people a little bit of context and just kind of a bit more of an in-depth. I think one of the name drop and the way that kind of people get an idea is you once walked out or quit on Jay-Z to get to where you've gotten to. So can you give us a little snippet of what that was like and kind of kind of the thought process behind that? Because again, I think when you hear that just kind of in a thing, be like, wait, she walked out on who? Like she quit on who? Like why would you do that? But obviously there were reasons behind that, but just kind of give us a little snippet of, because I think that's a huge part of your story and kind of the themes that you brought out about not only obviously working hard and being a good person, all that kind of stuff, but you have to have the courage to do things that may seem counterintuitive or counterproductive, or maybe not what everyone's going to be kind of applauding you for, of making decisions and making moves that maybe don't seem like they're kind of on the straight and narrow, but indeed maybe sidestepping. But again, that you did it for certain reasons, and then that there's been some, the blessing that God has given to you and just kind of the way that he's orchestrated your career kind of in and through that.
I didn't walk out on Jay personally. It sounds so dramatic when you say it that way. I think what you're trying to say is, I did work at Rock Nation, which is Jay-Z's company. And clearly he is one of the more famous, label heads out there, or entertainment heads out there, and artists out there in the world. But I think when I look back at my career, I've experienced it all. I've experienced, being hired. I've experienced not being hired for something that I thought was my dream job. I've experienced being laid off, and I thought that was one of the worst things in the world, even though I wanted to be laid off because I had outgrown that place and was like, I really, really need a change. And I've also been in a position where I realized, hey, something's not working for me anymore. And I was able to literally say, hey, this isn't working for me anymore. Thank you so much for the opportunity, but I'm done. And, but then I've also been in places where I've been able to work for myself. And I've also been in positions where I've worked for major corporations. So when I look back at that, all those pinpoints go back to again, having the courage to do something that is so shaky and so uncertain. And it's definitely a walk out on water, step out on faith sort of moment. Losing your job is a walk out on water moment. Quitting a job without another job lined up is a walk out on water moment. And going and reaching out to this, COO of a major label to say, hey, I'm now available and I would love to work for you. And having that COO write you back and say, come on in for an interview is a walk on a water moment. And I think that is probably one of the biggest messages and like words of encouragement that I can offer to you and your students and your listeners is, are you walking out on water in your life? When we read these Bible stories and, hear about them on Sunday, it's very, quote unquote, biblical, and it happened a long time ago. But these walk on water moments, these step out on faith moments happen on a day-to-day basis. And they're really, really scary. And when you find something in life that is really, really scary, that's the thing that you should go after. And that's the thing you should push yourself to do. Because on the other side of that fear, on the other side of getting out of that boat, is literally where the magic happens. And I think as Koreans, we're taught to, again, like, just keep your head down and work, right? Keep your head down and study, keep your head down and work, and it's given to you. And it's definitely not given to you. Even Jesus calls us to step out of that boat, right? So I think that's the biggest lesson that I've learned in my life, that God has put on my heart to share, is literally like, what is the thing that scares the bees out of you? Like the bejesus or whatever, those scares the crap out of you. That is probably the thing that you should do, because it requires a lot of faith and it requires leaning on Him.
Yeah, no, again, that's for me a kind of like the little theme, or not the little, the big theme of, I think, your life. Just again, knowing where you came from and where you've gotten to. I think it's a perfect little segue to talk about, I think, what we really wanted to talk about on this podcast, which is this podcast. If anything, Grace, I'm going to say Chris and I, my sound engineer, my intern over here, you can't see him, he's off camera.
Hi, Chris.
We've been trying to kind of think about our podcast for a while. We started a podcast because obviously we wanted to kind of create different conversations rather than just the kind of the Sunday sermon moment. And we'd been doing like exploring topics, but a lot of it, again, felt kind of Sunday teachy kind of thing. And so we were looking at it and be like, we need to find a voice. We need to find something that makes our podcast different, and something that's going to be, something that people want to listen to. And we were kind of stuck for a long time, and we tried a lot of different things. And then you texted me randomly, kind of out of the blue, last week or 2 weeks ago, or whenever it was. And you came up with the idea that pretty much brought on this podcast that now we have, a couple more guests lined up and things like that, just to, explore stories and explore those things. Can you give us a little bit of kind of what led to that? You're hinting at it, obviously, throughout, kind of looking at your story. But yeah, what led you to reach out to us and kind of for us to start this podcast and explore kind of this avenue of looking at people's stories and looking at how God is working in them, and just kind of looking at the realities of what it means to live as Christians in the world, no matter who you are, but just to kind of explore the very different stories that are out there.
I will say my text to you when I did reach out recently was very much, and being very vulnerable at a time when I think a lot of us in this country and all over the world were just feeling very shaky and very uncertain of our place in the world, uncertain of like who our leaders are, uncertain of who we're putting our faith in. And it really sparked a fire within me of like, what am I doing? Right? I am putting my hope in our government leaders, even our religious leaders. I'm putting hope in, police officials and teachers and my bosses, right? And these people are not our saviors. And so my only savior is Jesus Christ. And I feel like it put it back on me of like, so what am I doing to be, the hands and feet in these scenarios? So that's part of what I, reached out about, because we had a conversation very similar to that when I was in Houston, almost half a year ago. own business. And I think it really put a light in me of just like in this time where we are seeking community, when we are seeking just unity within our community, right? I just for some reason felt it in my heart of like, what am I doing for my Korean American youth? And it just being very transparent about when we were growing up, we really didn't have anyone to look up to. That's not a dig on our parents. It is very much we have had to figure out how to navigate being Korean and how to navigate being American. And actually how to navigate being Korean American, which is a completely different, lane in my opinion. And so I think the fact that I realized that we didn't have that made me realize I need to be that for somebody else, because we had to sort of just figure it out on our own. And it was really, really hard. And especially in today's climate, it's even harder because you don't have your school community, you don't have your church community in person, we're all alone. And so I almost wanted to just call you and like say, let's rally everybody. Let's rally and, break bread digitally. And let's talk about what's going on in the world because we need each other. And I think that's really what has sparked into my heart of like, what am I actively doing to make things better? And remember, I just mentioned that, we think of these Bible stories as something so fictional because it was so long ago, right? But the Bible story here is really like, are you carrying your cross and really, doing what you say that you believe? And that belief is, are you out there, helping those in need right now? Are you out there standing up for people who don't have a voice? Are you out there working for justice? Like, those are things that I've been thinking about for the last few weeks and the things that have been keeping me up at night. I definitely did not sleep last night. So I think it was just more a call for me to like rally everyone and be like, what are we doing? Because we have a community. When you and I were growing up, we really didn't have a large Korean American. I think it was starting to grow, and I think it's definitely grown a lot, but it's grown a lot more since then. And I think if we had more leaders stepping up to the plate, you and I would look different too. But we have stepped into those leadership roles in our own ways. And I think one of the things that we have had to deal with is doing things despite what everyone else thought. And a lot of our culture is very much about like honoring your parents by doing exactly everything they say. And what I have learned, not just in my college days, right, with moving away and all that stuff, and even now in the day to day, is like honoring your parents does not mean listening and doing to everything that they say. Honoring them means like loving them, right? Making sure that they understand where you're coming from, but also being like very respectful and having meaningful conversations, about how you're feeling. And I know there are a lot of challenges that surround that. But I think they're absolutely necessary. I hope that makes sense. I feel like it was a lot of thoughts jumbled together.
No, it definitely does. I think, one of the things that I think that and so to give a little bit of context to everyone who's listening, Grace was out here in Houston on business. She was shooting a promo with Lizzo, and Lizzo, if people don't know, attended the University of Houston. And so they thought that it was going to be a good idea for her to be here to do that. So she had change of plans. It was last minute. I think you guys were supposed to be in like Minneapolis or Minnesota, I think originally, but then something had changed wherever you were supposed to be. But then, she hit me up and she was like, hey, I'm going to be in Houston. I'm going to have a little bit of time. I would love to see you. I haven't seen you in obviously in such a long time. And so she was able to come out to my place and we had a conversation. In that conversation, the thing that I walked away from and the thing that I remember we talked about was the fact that you were doing what you were doing, not only in your professional career, because it's amazing that you are, because you're a unicorn, you're a mermaid, like you're a fish out of water in that sense. Like there aren't too many people like you who are in the industry that you're in and doing as well as you're in. And so that creates kind of this idea and someone to look up to. Because again, when we were younger, we were told to go and be the doctors and the lawyers, and we're just being honest. And this is a conversation that's happening in our nation. We were told to essentially be the white man. because there were no Asian Americans that we could look up to. And now it's like, even if, Andrew Yang, like, is someone that people can look up to, he's more of a public figure and that kind of, so there's different people in different places, Asian American, Korean American, that we can look to. And, even if you don't think, and, however you think of him, he's a little controversial, but like David Chang, who's a, Korean American, restaurateur, all that kind of stuff. We just didn't have that growing up at all. And so we were told to essentially try to be better, but try to basically be the white man. And then I remember talking to you, and it was a frustration that I had with our young people saying, like, they don't have to all be just lawyers, doctors, and engineers. They could be a lot of different things. And you were kind of this beacon of light for me, because even for me, I'm a pastor, but a lot of Asian Americans, Korean Americans, they go to church. A lot of Korean Americans, especially dudes, men, they become pastors. And so there's a sense of that. But then for you to have gotten to where you are, and then of course for me, the most important part is that you did it in NYC. You live in Brooklyn now. You did it in the heart of this, the cultural capital of the world, and yet you followed Christ all the way through, and just kind of tracking. For me, always the biggest thing was just even praying for you, being like, God, I hope, if she's going to keep being in New York, she's going to keep doing these things, that she would follow after you even harder, so that whatever success, whatever stuff that she's going to get would always be in this context of, you can be a Christian and a faithful one and still do work well and still survive and thrive in a city like New York and things of that nature. It's not just being a good Christian isn't just for a small town, or, not being in like like the music industry, things like that. It's not just like that. There's actually ways to do that, and for you to be an example. And so we had that conversation, and then with all the stuff that's happened in our nation of late, you reached out, and that was kind of the big thing, is like, what am I doing to inspire our community as Asian Americans, as Korean Americans, to indeed, like you said, step out to the water and become what God is wanting us to become. I've always believed that God wants and desires to have good, faithful disciples of Christ in every workplace, every industry, and every place, because that's how we're going to have the most reach and the light. And so you being not only in the music industry and a faithful disciple of Christ, but you being in the position that you are, and all the stories that come with you getting to where you are, because unless we're naive, there's no way you get to where you are without conflict, without having to deal with, drama. And I'm hoping in future podcasts with you, we can talk about some of that stuff in more detail, because I'm sure you have tons of stories to share about all that stuff. And so like that was kind of the thing that was exciting. And when you reached out, that like it jumped out at me. Because for me, it was this opportunity to be like, I want to expose our local here in Houston. And we talked about that over the phone in preparing for this podcast, how like it's really interesting that, I'm hosting this and we're here in Houston, which depending on where you are from in the country or in the world, like Houston is, and we're cowboy country kind of, even though we're not really, but, and things like that. And so, and of course, and Houston is becoming a big major focal point. George Floyd is from Houston. So many people, actually Houston natives, things like that have kind of garnered attention, and for good and good reasons and things like that. So that was kind of what jumped out at me, that you wanted to be a voice, you wanted to be an example, primarily to inspire and to challenge and guide folks to go ahead and say, you can dream of more. I wanted you to be a person that our students and young people across the country, particularly Korean Americans, can look at, and that you can do that. Because again, I keep saying it, but in so many ways, you are so Korean American to the T. You didn't grow up in some weird context, like, completely out. No, you are Korean American to the T. Your parents are Korean American immigrants to the T. Like all of us, that we lived that life. And then for you to be where you are and to have essentially avoided by God's grace all the pitfalls that come with doing what you're doing, which is to go to NYC, to work in an industry that you do, which is, the music industry, the entertainment industry, stuff like that. And yet for you to get to where you are, is just a testament of what God has done, and also to who you are and the way that God is using you. And to think about, to dream about you using that platform and that voice is just so, it's so exciting. It's so, like I'm getting giddy and just happy thinking about it, because even I remember that night when you came by to the house, and then I dropped you off at the hotel, and then I went straight to church, because we were having some event, and I arrived a little late, and then people were like, yo, why are you late? And I was like, oh, I was just, and I told you I was do this, but I was like, oh, I was just dropping off a friend. She's like, oh yeah, and she's in Houston because, Lizzo's filming a thing. She works with, so-and-so. And I name dropped a bunch of things, and they were like, what? Like, you have a friend? I was like, yeah, she's a friend of mine from high school. No big deal. Cause again, to me, you're Grace, my friend from high school, before you are Grace, senior VP of Atlantic, and so on and so forth. But I remember thinking then, those folks that I was talking to, those students and young people that I was talking to, they were amazed, because you weren't a doctor, You weren't a lawyer. You weren't an engineer. And the artists that they're listening to, you work with. And I remember that night I told the story about how I think like Lizzo wanted to eat like pizza or something like late night, and you were like, "No, I don't want to eat this late. Like I'm not, like I'm not down for that kind of idea." And so for you to be able to use that platform, but also to just kind of inspire us to dream and to think about what you can do. And there are so many parts of your story that we won't get to today for time reasons. Obviously, you're not married to a Korean American, which is what most Korean Americans do. Things like that. And then just kind of those stories. There's so much about, I think, that we can learn from your heart. And then now that you have this kind of burning desire to say, I want to speak, I want to be a voice, I want to be an example, to inspire and to challenge Korean Americans to, as you said, not just put our head down, not to kind of lay low, and to do those things is inspiring. I think what you're doing is what a friend of mine, a pastor friend of mine, said this kind of on one of his little videos. He said, the reason why we need to speak out in the climate that we have, and that we need to use our voices, is because at the beginning of this pandemic, when Asian Americans were getting, being ill-treated, we spoke up maybe more than we ever have as a community, as an Asian American community. We signed petitions. There was stuff going online and all that stuff. And then
we
he
were
said
forced
this,
to.
yeah. And then he said this, and this is, I think, where you fit in, and where this podcast, again, where we're getting kind of the inspiration for this podcast. He says, and back in those days for us, when we remember, and it wasn't even that long ago, but when we remembered, there was a certain sense of joy and like encouragement and strength that we felt when people who weren't Asian Americans spoke out on our behalf and said, no, we're not going to stand up for this behavior. And then he said, and then what was also really glaring, and those things that he and others like us spoke out about, are those who were not like us, that were not speaking out. Yeah. And for us, as in the church context, obviously church leaders and all that kind of stuff. And then what we found was that in some ways, when all of this stuff with Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and obviously George Floyd, all this stuff happened, we decided, and we were being stirred in our hearts to say, we can't stay silent anymore. And that's kind of where this all came from for you, being like, I need to inspire and challenge and use my voice to step out and say, no, we can be more as Asian Americans. You can look up to people, and you can be inspired and dream to become, more than maybe what we've been taught to. Again, nothing against our parents, but that we can be the voice and say, no, you can do more, and God can do indeed a lot in us. And so, that's kind of the major thing that I'm hearing from you, and that I want to kind of explore in future podcasts and future conversations with you, just to see like where your heart is burning.
You did such a better job explaining where my heart was at, so I'll give that to you. I think there are a couple of things I would love to touch on. I know we have a lot of things to go over, or could go over. I remember feeling for a really long time that I never really belonged anywhere. And I was never Korean enough. I was never American enough. I was never, I just never felt like I really, really fit in somewhere, right? Like, even like with the family situation, I don't know about you, but like we would sit for dinner, right? But we wouldn't have the in-depth conversations that I think a lot of us needed or wanted, right? It was very much like, did you do your homework? Did you eat? Did you apply for school? Or do you need this? What do you need? And it's not a dig on our parents, because our parents come from backgrounds where it was literally about survival. And it was about, providing for your family, putting food on the table, because they literally did not have that. And all they wanted to do was provide an education, because my parents didn't get to finish their education. So for them, it was very much like, let's get them across the finish line. Let's give them what they need, like the basic necessities. Let's love on them, right? But it was very much about survival and assimilating and like just, building family wealth or like success, right? Because that's where we literally come from, a very poor country. But now I think we have a next generation of kids who are literally like, who don't even know that they have that voice, because that voice is not exercised, and our voices are muscle. And I think part of that is you are not forced to use it until like literally your survival depends on it. And I think that's what we experienced with COVID, is that like we had to speak up in order to survive, right? Because some of us were literally physically being assaulted. And it was scary because we've never had to use it. But it was also one of the most amazing things that I've seen for myself of like, wait, that's not okay. And as much as some people were like, hey, that person didn't speak up for me or it didn't matter. You have to speak up for yourself, right? You have to speak up for yourself in your classroom. You have to speak up for yourself in corporate America because no one else cares as much about you and your community and your family. And so I think, by the way, even in the music business, I don't fit in. I'm not white. I'm not black, right? And that's not a dig either. That is very much the reality of the landscape of like pop music and rock music and, you know, country and hip hop and R&B, soul, jazz, etc. And I think for me, I think even growing up, I thought like fitting into one or the other meant that I would be more successful. But the reality is there was no way that I was ever going to fit in. You cannot shove me into a box because I will never fit in. And I think the sooner I realized that and accepted that, I was able to carve my own lane. And I think that's something that, you know, we should encourage our youth to do as well, is that like, you don't have to fit in. You don't have to be like everyone else. It's actually quite boring. And I know when you're 16, 17, 18, all you want to do is fit in, you know, but being different is actually your biggest strength. And being different is what helps you recognize what your voice is. And your voice does matter. Your voice does matter. Look at the change that is happening in our country on a day-to-day basis because somebody said something or somebody recorded something or someone started a petition. Like, these are real things. And I think if you look at the data, Asian Americans are the fastest growing racial group in this country. We account for about $13 trillion of spend in this country. And we're supposed to be one of the top spending groups by 2025. Like, those are real statistics. We have influence. We are in, you know, we're some of the smartest people. We're some of the most savvy people. We should be using that influence for good.
Yeah. No, and that's kind of what's exciting is I think there is a movement and a wave, I think. We didn't touch on the Black Lives Matter stuff, which we will, because that's a topic that is at the very core of who you are, for reasons that we'll get into. This is a shameless way of saying there's going to be more of Grace Kim James to come, which we're excited about because we can't cover it all. Yeah, but I think the last kind of question, and then like I said, we'll save some stuff, and just again for people to kind of get a little foretaste of stuff. Grace is going to share with us, hopefully in the future, stories about her marriage and what that took in terms of, again, stepping out into the water. Again, some of the stuff more professionally about what that meant in terms of doing that, even going to NYU and decided to be going into the entertainment industry instead of going into law. And for me, going into that's something that we share in terms of having to do that. Obviously, all those things will be stuff that we talk about in the near future. I think the last question that I have that I just wanted to get kind of your own personal take on was, when you did decide to do some of those things, they were by and large against your parents' wishes. And that's kind of the biggest thing for Asian Americans is that we sit in this place where, and this is kind of what you're talking about. I always say Korean Americans are a hybrid race. And every Korean American is different because some Korean Americans are like 80% Korean, 20% American. Some are like 50-50, some are 40-60. And everyone is very different. And the unfortunate thing is most people don't know what their percentage is. They kind of have to grow to understand what that is depending on where they grew up and depending on, their culture and their family life and all that stuff. But even in that kind of space, the one thing that we struggle is that we are fed this, and again, it's not a dig to our parents. That is what they need. That's why they came to this country in the first place, by and large. We're fed this American dream where we could be anything and everything. They wanted us to become the best. I remember my dad telling me things like, this is what a father says to you, like, you're the smartest kid that I know. You could be anything if you put all your heart into it. And, it's like, okay, thanks, Dad. All that kind of stuff. But then for him to limit what you can be down to like literally these 3 alleys is not really, it's completely counterintuitive and counterproductive in many ways. And so then we sat sat between this American dream where we were told to study hard and go to the best schools and be everything that you can be and, make a lot of money and all those kind of things. But then on the other hand, we were told, stay in your lane, do what I tell you to do, because if you don't, then it's a scary world out there. Like, these are the safest routes for you to have comfort, security, whatever it is that they were preaching to us.
Mm-hmm.
And yet you, by and large, are a great example of how you didn't do what your parents wanted you to do, but you didn't, like, you and your parents have great relationships now. So it's not like, so you made a lot of decisions that they didn't agree with at first or, on the surface, but you were still able to love on them. You were still able to do what Christ calls us to, which is to honor them in the biblical sense, and then still be able to, like, find your path, find your identity, who you were, but also still be loving and kind of keep, like, for me, that's my biggest thing with you, Grace, is you are and have been able to, and I believe will be able to always navigate that tough space between doing what God calls us to do, loving our parents in this Korean American kind of cultural context, but still being able to step out in faith and then following God without having to burn bridges, without having to, say, no, I'm not this anymore, which is a lot of times what I feel like I think our contemporaries and our younger folks feel like, oh, if they want to go chase their dream, they're going to have to disappoint their parents, and their parents are going to have to, whatever. If people know my story, I got disowned by my dad for a while for becoming a pastor, but obviously we're great now, and God has done great work in that, in the reconciliation. But yeah, share with us just a little bit about kind of how you navigated those situations and kind of what really gave you the gumption. Because again, in high school, I would have never anticipated that was going to be like a calling card of yours, like something that defines who you are, to the point where you are now, Grace Kim James, where you show up on a set and they think they're going to get whatever it is that they think they're going to get with Grace James is definitely not an Asian American female. And so, like, how you kind of navigated that and were able to make those decisions.
I think part of it when I was growing up and younger, it was very much coming from a place of, like, my parents just don't understand, right? How many of us said, like, my parents just don't understand? They don't. That's the fact. And the reason that they don't is because they haven't been given the opportunities to explore and dream. They literally have been stuck in a world where the only thing that they know in as far as, like, success and careers go in particular are trades and literally doctors and lawyers and judges, right?
Yep.
Like, that's what they aspire to. They've never had the privilege of dreaming to be something else. My parents probably even to this day don't even know what a video editor does, or a colorist or a graphic designer or, a producer or, an audio engineer. Like, these are all new skills that are coming out in this business that allow you to have, quote unquote, professional success, right? At the end of the day, all your parents want for you is for you to be okay. And that's something that I had to learn in the long term. When I was going to New York, it was more sort of like hey, this is what she wants to do, we'll support it. Like, God bless my parents, because my parents definitely gave me a bit more free rein, because they were like, okay, she kind of knows what she's doing. She's never really gotten in trouble before. Like, I think we'll sort of, like, let her figure this out, and she'll probably move back to Virginia.
Shout out to your parents, by the way, because they're amazing people. I miss them. I wish I could say hello to them, but
I'm sure they would love to hear from you too. We'll have to make that happen somehow. But I think they always expected me to, like, either come home or, like, okay, this won't work out. Like, this little thing that she'll do, like, she'll sort of, like, try it and then it won't work out. And in the beginning, the music business thing was a really hard thing for them, because here they just invested so much money in me getting this expensive education. And then I was struggling financially because, my industry, when you're first starting out, it's pretty rough. Like, I was working long hours. I was probably making minimum wage. And in their minds, they're like, I just sent you to this really expensive school. Why are you making minimum wage? Right. But it was something that I had to really fight for and really be like, I got this, right? Again, I was able to pay my rent. I was able to put food on the table. They don't know how hard it was sometimes, but, like, they just saw, like, I had it together. When it came to, and then over the years, they still don't know what I do, by the way. they do know I work in the music business, but they have no idea what my day-to-day life is like. But they've seen my life change. They've seen my lifestyle change. It's like, okay, I think she's doing okay, right? That's all they care about is like, is she going to be okay? Like, if I die, is she going to be okay? And for Asian American women, you know, especially, it's another thing of like, whoever she marries, are they going to take care of her? Is she going to be okay? And I was always that female that was like, I'll be okay no matter what. So I've always had sort of like that spirit in me of just like, I'm just going to prove you wrong, I think. But when it came time for my marriage, I think the marriage thing was a really hard thing where I decided at one point, like, I'm going to marry someone not just out of my race, but I'm going to marry like someone who is socially so different for our culture. And I ended up marrying a Black man. And, you know, I think for them, it was sort of like a pause moment of like, this is not what we were expecting. And Mike would be the first one to tell you that he was like, you didn't tell them that I was Black, did you? You know, and there were some times where there were some really hard conversations. And there were times where we did not speak. And that was probably one of the hardest times of my life because I had always been this kid that always made their parents happy because I got good grades and because, you know, I never got in trouble and they really didn't cause me any heartaches. But that was probably one of the things that made us not talk for the first time ever. And again, as hard as it was also probably one of the best things I've done for myself because it changed my parents' perception of me and our relationship where they were forced to sit down and talk to me. And my Korean has gotten worse over the years. Your Korean has gotten better. My Korean has gotten worse in the sense of like, I don't practice it on the day to day. And it's, again, just another muscle. But I had to have some really tough conversations about like, this is how I feel. This is who I love and want to marry. And this is someone who's a believer. And they came around. It took time. We cannot expect our parents to change overnight as they can't expect us to change overnight, right? Yep. But it does take a lot of hard conversations and a lot of discomfort. And that's okay. And that's so countercultural for us. It's so countercultural for us to not be okay with everybody. We want peace. We want it to be sort of like calm. We don't want any trouble. And it goes back to literally like, are you stepping out in faith? Are you getting out of the boat and literally walking on water because you firmly believe in that? However, I will say the opposite of if you are not connected to Christ, if you are not rooted in a foundation, walking on water is a lot harder, right? If what you're doing is not actually the right thing, you are literally going to sink. And sometimes you don't know, right? You don't know if it's not going to work or if it's going to work or if this is the right thing. But part of that comes in your walk and knowing like, no, I know I'm right. And I think that's the thing that we ultimately, Pete, wanted to encourage everyone to do is like have those hard conversations, dream, be uncomfortable. We are all uncomfortable right now. This is that time where you can have some really uncomfortable conversations, but necessary conversations with your parents, with your cousins, you know, with your aunts and uncles, with your friends even, because those uncomfortable conversations are what are going to literally change your life.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I echo those sentiments wholeheartedly. Being where I am and having gotten to where we've gotten to, so much so because of the tough conversations and then the convictions to follow Christ. I think one thing that I would like to state, I think the only reason why we're still good friends and the only reason why we can still, you know, though we don't get a chance to talk to each other all that much, although I think we're going to get to talk to each other a lot more going forward, because again, through this medium and just kind of, I think, a shared heart that we have for this. But though we've known each other since middle school, after, like, even in the middle of college, I know I came to visit you one time with my wife, I think, when we were engaged. And then I think beyond that, it would be like when I would come into the city every once in a while, which doesn't happen very often. I would always, make sure to hit you up. But, those were few and far between. But I think the thing that really made us, and I can say that, without a shadow of a doubt, connected, and then like you can pick it up so quickly, was that we were always connected with Christ, that we followed Christ, and that was always kind of the common bond. And I know that sounds cliche, but it really isn't. For us, it really gave us a grounding to continually pick it up, to know that no matter what is happening, we always had a place to kind of come back to. And even our conversation in Houston, about half a year ago, that was kind of this idea that God was placing something on our hearts, and we could always trust that. We were marveling at who we were from when we were in high school, and then what God has done in us, and the kind of people that we've become now at the age that we're in, kind of middle-aged or whatever. But I think I want to stress that is indeed have been the case, and that has been the thing that I've seen in your life through and through. Every decision that you've made, every step that you've taken, it has always been with Christ as the anchor, and that has always been the most kind of encouraging and challenging, humbling thing for me to watch you do what you do, and things like that. And so,
Can I ask, do you ever think about like when we used to go to these like youth group concerts, not concerts, but youth group like retreats, and you were supposed to give your life to Christ, right? And at like 14, 15, 16, when someone tells you like give yourself to Christ and like let him be in the driver's seat and yada, 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 because I'm going to say yada, yada, yada. I remember thinking, I don't want to be a pastor or a pastor's wife. And I bet everyone listening now is like laughing, because I want to tell everyone right now, like the biggest misconception in giving your life to Christ is that you have to be a pastor. That is absolutely not true. And that's not a dig on my friend, Pastor Pete over here. That is really like, man, our world would be so much more our community would be more impactful. Our world would be so much better if we all, those of us who love Christ, who have loving hearts, went out in the world and were influencers and people of love and change in our everyday workplaces and environments. So, I think that's the thing I take out of this in my life, is just like giving your life to Christ is not just being a pastor or just being, a clergy person. It is literally like, actually, you should think the complete opposite and think about how you can bring Christ into your workplace.
Yeah, because by and large, most Christians are not going to be pastors.
Mm-hmm.
It's a unique call that's specifically for certain people.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things, and this is just being honest, pastors have a tendency to have pastors' friends, like friends who are pastors, and then maybe not a whole bunch of else, like everyone else is kind of their congregant or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to say it. I know you being my friend makes my ministry and my witness in a lot of different ways so much more dynamic, because I'm not like disconnected with the world. And I know I have friends and people who are literally living in quote unquote the real world, who do real world things and are dealing with these things, not just from a faith perspective, but from the kind of the cross section of faith and life. And that's kind of the most important kind of thing I think that you're doing. And again, to throw in all the other dynamics of your life with Mike and, with your workplace and the people that you work with regularly on the daily in the city that you live in, is just kind of the thing that I think, really brings kind of like really draws people into this story. We're, for the sake of the future podcasts, by the way, for those of you who have made it this far, Grace has shared with me, and I'm going to put it out here on the podcast world so that she can't renege. She said she's going to want to come to Houston whenever she's able to travel and things like that. So we're going to have an in-person one, not the Zoom thing, but hopefully we'll be able to do one in person. But also, this is going to be a continuing conversation that we have about her life, about what God has done. There's so much more depth. This podcast was just to kind of give, whet your appetite a little bit, just so you can get to know Grace a little bit, to kind of get to know her story just a little bit. But we're going to talk about a lot more kind of deeper and kind of more specific issues in the times to come, particularly things like obviously her marriage. Being in an interracial marriage, being, obviously in terms of how that her parents took it, all that kind of stuff that I think it's going to be a topic that's going to be coming up within Korean American circles for years and years to come. Also kind of the way that she handled her career and the things that she had to make, and just the difficulties and the obstacles that she's faced being a Korean American, being a Korean American female, and all that kind of stuff to get to where she is. So much more, and about how her faith was integrated in and through all of that is kind of where we're headed. And so we're going to kind of cut it here because, again, just to look forward to what's coming. I think the last thing that I want to say, Grace, is I'm just tremendously blessed to have you as a friend. I'm encouraged and challenged and humbled by you all the time.
Oh, man.
And it's just one of those things that I think, again, for me, the crazy thing is, I saw pictures of myself from high school because I was looking through them trying to find a picture of you. I couldn't find any, and I was just like, holy moly. Maybe it's a good thing. Maybe if you find some pictures of yourself back in those days, Grace, you can send them to me and we'll just kind of screenshot them in here at the end. And, maybe I'll throw some of myself in high school.
Gosh.
I don't know if we'll see. But just to see kind of where God has brought us. And I know that for me, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Jesus. And I think you would say the same, that you if it wasn't for him, you wouldn't be here. And so for us to reconnect in this way. And again, I have just kind of for the listeners out there, a local pastor here named Kobe, who is a white pastor here, at Clear Lake Ecclesia, who actually happened to work at Quest Church in Seattle, which is one of the nation's leading multi-ethnic Pan-Asian churches. And so he's going to bring his story about racial reconciliation, just kind of all the stuff that he's learned. So it's kind of inspiring even this. I wanted to encourage you in that way, Grace, because we had been thinking about stuff, but you really brought you brought a name, you brought a theme, a vision for where we're going. And so I'm super thankful for that. And then just kind of your realness and just who you are. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank
the first
you for
ever
having
Zoom
me.
Podcast that we've done, I think, was a success.
Yay.
Chris was over there doing his work as an audio engineer. Funny that you mentioned audio engineers, because he was going to be one, and then God called him, and then he became a pastor. So he literally crosses that bridge of like, just because you follow Christ doesn't mean to be a pastor, but that's where he's going to go. But he's also using his audio engineering degree.
But you can do both, clearly, right?
Yep.
People assume that because I work in music that I know the audio. I don't know the audio stuff. That's not my specialty. But Chris has a tangible skill that clearly is very useful during quarantine right now.
Oh, he's going to make us sound great. This podcast is going to make us sound sexy. I don't know. That's probably a bad word.
Just don't auto-tune me, Chris. No auto-tune.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, Grace is a fantastic singer. In high school, she was a part of all-state choir, and she did stuff like that.
Wow.
Yeah, you were. You drove
was.
all the way down to some middle of nowhere, the corner of Tennessee and Virginia, if I remember correctly. What is that city called?
I don't even.
I can't remember.
Bristol?
I feel like. Yeah, Bristol? I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyways,
I think it's Bristol.
Grace is doing that. So maybe one day we'll get her to sing on here. We'll see. She can dust off the vocal pipes and sing for us a little bit. But anywho, Grace, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was my pleasure.
Pete. Thank you, Chris.
Say hello to your family for me, including your wonderful. You have 2 dogs.
No, I have one dog.
One. Brooklyn
Just one.
is your dog.
Yes. That's my son. Very much my son, who was very sick the last 2 days, but he's feeling better now. You have real children, so I can't really say that.
Yeah, you can see them all. I made this background in my office just so I could show off my children, because they make everything better. But yeah, we will do this again, hopefully not too long from now. We're going to be preparing. So again, and then for those of you who are listening, particularly at our church, but whoever is listening out there, if you have any questions, just things that might have popped up in your mind, you can always email us. You can comment. We're going to be posting this on YouTube, but also as a podcast, you can email us at arche@kcpch.org with any questions that you might have, and we'll get those over to Grace, and we'll talk about those things, more topics. But yeah, in the future, as we come, we're going to tackle some of the more difficult topics, things that Grace has been living through of late with all the stuff that's happening in our nation, just kind of where faith and life and all those things collide. And so we're excited for that. So stay tuned for that. But for this episode, we shall say goodbye, and until next time.
Thank you, guys. Bye.